A secret $12 trillion deal. More than 400 drones launched in a single night. Over 1,000 deaths from a fast-spreading new flu strain. And a European leader openly calling Ukraine our enemy. Tonight, the global order doesn't just feel tense, it feels unstable. Is Washington quietly negotiating with Moscow behind Kiev's back? Is Russia's wartime economy finally beginning to stall after years of defiance? Is Europe starting to fracture under the combined weight of war, energy politics, and internal divisions? And the most uncomfortable question of all, what happens if business interests outweigh moral commitments? I'm Livia, and this is Global Shift Analysis. Tonight, we're breaking down the numbers, the power plays, and the political signals that are quietly reshaping the future of Ukraine, Europe, and the global balance of power. Because nothing happening right now is random. Every statement, every missile strike, every diplomatic insult, it all means something. Let's begin. President Volodymyr Zelensky recently revealed intelligence about what he called the Dmitriev package, a proposed $12 trillion joint investment framework signaling potential economic cooperation between the United States and Russia. $12 trillion. To put that into perspective, Russia's entire GDP does not justify a deal of that magnitude. Economists were quick to question the math. By any conventional measure, the numbers simply do not add up. But Zelensky's concern was never just about economics. It was about politics and power. He warned that negotiations between Washington and Moscow may be unfolding without Ukraine at the table. His message was direct and unmistakable. Ukraine will not support even potential agreements about Ukraine without Ukraine. That statement followed reports of discussions taking place in Abu Dhabi, where Ukrainian officials made it clear to their American counterparts that Kyiv would reject any externally imposed settlement. For Ukraine, exclusion is not just insulting, it is dangerous. From Kyiv's perspective, the so-called Dmitriev package looks like a strategic maneuver by Moscow, an attempt to shift Washington's focus away from battlefield realities and toward massive economic incentives. A pivot from war to investment, from territory to transactions. Since the full-scale invasion began, Western companies pulled out of Russia. That exit created a vacuum, one that China has largely moved to fill. If American business interests were to re-enter the Russian market under a framework of joint investment, it would mark a profound geopolitical shift, not just economically, but strategically. Yet the signals coming from Washington remain inconsistent. Is this business-first diplomacy, or is it strategic leverage? Analysts note that negotiations related to Ukraine have sometimes included Kyiv, and at other times excluded it entirely, involving only Washington and Moscow. That inconsistency fuels concern in Europe and deep anxiety in Ukraine. The central sticking point remains territory. That has not changed. But increasingly, economic incentives appear to be running on a parallel track. Investment frameworks, revenue sharing, long-term cooperation. Ukraine's leverage lies in two areas: its continued willingness to fight and its mineral resources. A prior agreement reportedly allowed the United States to jointly explore Ukraine's mineral reserves with provisions for revenue sharing. That deal signaled that Kyiv understands the language of economic influence. Still, uncertainty dominates. No agreement has been finalized, no framework has been signed. And until a final document exists, everything remains speculation. Because in geopolitics, nothing is real until the ink dries. While diplomacy simmers behind closed doors, the battlefield tells a far more violent story. Overnight into Saturday, Russia launched more than 400 drones and nearly 40 missiles in a massive, coordinated assault across Ukraine. The scale alone was staggering. This was not a probing strike. It was a deliberate show of force. The targets were clear: energy infrastructure and civilian areas. The immediate toll: 4 people killed, 30 injured, but the broader impact reaches far beyond those numbers. This was not an isolated incident. It was part of a sustained campaign, a systematic effort to degrade Ukraine's energy grid and wear down civilian resilience. President Volodymyr Zelensky directly addressed the source of Russia's drone capabilities. He stated that producing this weaponry would be impossible without critical foreign components. parts Russia continues to obtain by circumventing sanctions. In response, he signed new sanctions targeting companies involved in supplying those components, as well as missile and drone manufacturers enabling the strikes. The attacks were geographically widespread. Lviv, Dnipro, Kherson, and Odessa all reported strikes. The message was unmistakable. Nowhere is entirely safe. In Kiev, the consequences are severe. Many apartment buildings are receiving just 1.5 to 2.5 hours of electricity per day. Families are rationing power. Businesses are struggling to operate. Hospitals and essential services face constant pressure, and the timing could not be worse. Temperatures are expected to remain below 20 degrees in the coming week, intensifying the humanitarian strain. Limited power in freezing conditions transforms infrastructure damage into a survival challenge. Ukrainian intelligence services are warning that further attacks are likely. This is not the peak. It may only be the continuation. Energy warfare has become central to Russia's strategy. It is no longer solely about territorial gains or frontline positioning. It is about civilian exhaustion. It is about turning winter into a weapon. It is about testing how long a society can function under relentless pressure. Missiles destroy transformers, drones target substations, but the ultimate objective goes beyond infrastructure. It is psychological. And as long as the power grid remains a target, the war extends far beyond the battlefield. For nearly 4 years, Russia's economy confounded expectations. When Moscow launched its full-scale invasion in 2022, many Western economists predicted a rapid collapse. Sanctions were sweeping, major corporations exited, financial restrictions tightened. The assumption was clear: isolation would cripple the system. But that is not what happened. After a brief recession in 2022, Russia's economy shifted into overdrive. Gross domestic product expanded by more than 4% in both 2023 and 2024, outperforming forecasts from the International Monetary Fund. Instead of contraction, there was acceleration. The engine behind that growth was wartime spending. Military expenditures surged to 7% of GDP, injecting massive state funding into defense production, manufacturing, and logistics. In pure accounting terms, war became an economic stimulus. At the same time, Russia successfully redirected its energy exports. Oil and gas flows that once supplied Europe were rerouted to India and China. Revenues continued to flow. The sanctions hurt, but they did not paralyze. For a time, Moscow appeared resilient. But 2025 is telling a different story. Economic growth has slowed sharply to just 1%. Even President Vladimir Putin acknowledged the decline, noting that the latest figure falls well below the 4.1% growth recorded in 2023 and the 4.3% seen in 2024. The IMF and the World Bank now project growth of only 0.8% going forward. Behind the slowdown lies a structural problem: labor. Millions of working-age men are either deployed on the front lines or have left the country to avoid conscription. The demographic strain is intensifying. According to the Kremlin's own estimates, Russia could face a shortage of 11 million workers by the end of the decade. Energy markets also present mounting risk. A global oil surplus could push prices downward in 2026, squeezing one of the Russian government's primary revenue sources. India, now one of Russia's largest oil buyers, may reduce imports as part of a new trade agreement with the United States. These pressures are real. They are measurable, but analysts caution against overestimating their immediate impact. 1% growth may be weak, but it is not collapse. It is not the kind of economic pain that forces strategic reversal. Experts suggest that only a contraction of -5% for 2 consecutive years would significantly alter Moscow's wartime calculus. Until then, the Kremlin absorbs the strain, and the war continues. Hungary is heading into a volatile election season, and the rhetoric is intensifying. Prime Minister Viktor Orbán recently branded Ukraine a national enemy, arguing that Kiev's insistence on cutting Russian energy ties directly harms Hungarian interests. His remarks came after the European Union voted to phase out Russian gas imports by 2027, a move designed to reduce Europe's dependence on Moscow and limit funding for Russia's war economy. For Orbán, however, cheap Russian energy remains a pillar of Hungary's economic strategy. His position has reinforced his reputation as one of the Kremlin's closest allies within the European Union, often challenging Brussels on sanctions, energy policy, and broader strategic alignment. But inside Hungary, the political landscape is shifting. The opposition TISA party, led by Peter Magyar, has entered the race with a comprehensive 240-page manifesto titled The Foundations of a Functioning and Humane Hungary. The document lays out a dramatically different vision for the country's future. Among its key proposals, the introduction of a wealth tax on the super-rich, adoption of the euro, a plan to end dependence on Russian gas by 2035, stronger integration within the European Union and NATO, and closer regional cooperation, particularly with Poland. The contrast with Orbán's approach is clear. Where he emphasizes sovereignty and energy pragmatism tied to Moscow, TISA promotes reintegration with Western institutions and a deliberate pivot away from Russian influence. Polling suggests that this message is resonating. Current surveys show Orbán's Fidesz party trailing by between 8 and 16 percentage points, a significant margin in a system long dominated by his leadership. Even an endorsement from U.S. President Donald Trump, who publicly praised Orbán as a true friend, fighter, and winner, may not be enough to reverse the trend. Hungary now stands at a crossroads. One path continues a Moscow-aligned, energy-focused pragmatism. The other signals deeper Western reintegration and structural reform. The choice Hungarian voters make will not only shape domestic policy, it will send a message about Europe's internal cohesion at a critical moment in history. A diplomatic row has erupted between Poland and the United States, exposing just how fragile even long-standing alliances can become under political pressure. The controversy began when U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Thomas Rose, publicly announced that he would sever contact with the Speaker of Poland's parliament. The move was triggered by remarks connected to Donald Trump and the decision not to nominate him for the Nobel Peace Prize. What might have remained a political disagreement quickly escalated into a public diplomatic confrontation. The ambassador's announcement sparked immediate backlash in Poland. Government officials expressed frustration, and lawmakers across the political spectrum questioned both the tone and the appropriateness of the response. The incident also drew criticism in Washington, including from some U.S. lawmakers who viewed the move as unnecessarily provocative. Poland's foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, responded cautiously but pointedly. He raised a critical question. Was the ambassador acting on official instructions from Washington, or was this a personal decision made independently? He also questioned whether there had been any coordination with Poland's domestic political opposition, a suggestion that further heightened tensions. Calls emerged from within Poland to formally summon the ambassador and demand clarification or an apology. Yet, despite the strong reactions, efforts were made to de-escalate the situation. Former U.S. Ambassador to Poland, Daniel Fried, described the episode as an irritation rather than a strategic rupture. In his assessment, the incident reflected a lack of diplomatic experience rather than a shift in U.S.-Polish relations. He emphasized that similar disputes have occurred in the past and were ultimately resolved without lasting damage. Still, the episode underscores an uncomfortable reality. Even among close allies, diplomacy can be derailed by political symbolism, social media, and personal grievances. At a time of heightened geopolitical strain, small diplomatic missteps can carry outsized consequences, and alliances cannot be taken for granted. Beyond geopolitics and diplomatic tension, Poland is confronting a serious public health emergency. A new subtype of influenza A, known as subclade K, has spread rapidly across the country. Unlike previous seasonal strains, this variant is unfamiliar to the immune system, leaving much of the population with little to no immunological memory. That vulnerability has accelerated transmission. Between September 3rd and February 1st, Poland recorded more than 430,000 confirmed infections. Of those, approximately 40,000 cases were linked to complications. Most alarming, over 1,000 people have died during that 5-month period. And health experts caution that the true numbers are likely higher, possibly 1.5 to even 2 times greater, because many individuals self-test at home and never report their illness to family doctors. Those cases do not appear in official statistics. The elderly have been hit hardest, particularly individuals over the age of 85, where mortality rates are highest. Hospitals in several regions have reinstated mandatory mask policies and suspended patient visits to protect those with compromised immunity. Schools are also feeling the impact, reporting low attendance among both students and teachers. Most concerning of all, virologists warn that the seasonal peak has not yet arrived. In Japan, Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi is projected to secure a landslide victory in a snap election, solidifying her coalition's majority despite unusually low voter turnout caused by severe winter conditions. Snow and freezing temperatures kept many voters home, yet the election results indicate strong support for her leadership. Takaichi's agenda is clear and ambitious. She has pledged tax cuts and subsidies aimed at stimulating the economy while maintaining tough immigration policies that appeal to her conservative base. At the same time, she plans to significantly increase military spending, a move that has already drawn concern from Beijing and further strained already tense Sino-Japanese relations. Japan's alignment with the United States remains firm, and the country continues to be a cornerstone of the Western alliance in the Indo-Pacific region. However, the electoral outcome and the policies it enables will require delicate geopolitical balancing, increasing defense budgets, taking a hard line on immigration, and managing relations with China, all intersect with broader regional security concerns. Prime Minister Takaichi's decisive win provides her with a strong mandate to push forward her policy priorities, but it also highlights the challenges Japan faces in maintaining strategic stability in a complex and increasingly contested region. The global community will be watching closely. As the world watches, the underlying pattern becomes clear. Power, economics, and principle are colliding on multiple fronts. Elizabeth Bra, senior fellow at the Atlantic Council, highlighted the central concern in recent discussions. Ukraine must not be excluded from decisions that shape its own future. Yet intelligence about the so-called Dmitriev package reveals a troubling possibility. Negotiations between Washington and Moscow may prioritize economic opportunity over international law and moral responsibility. Western companies left Russia after the invasion, creating a vacuum quickly filled by Chinese firms eager to capitalize on Moscow's needs. Now, potential American investment in Russia could shift geopolitical balances, raising profound questions. Should business interests override the rights and sovereignty of an invaded nation? Ukraine's strongest cards remain its resilience and rich mineral resources. Prior agreements allowed the United States to jointly explore these resources, giving Kyiv leverage. Yet these advantages may be sidelined if decisions are made behind closed doors. Power politics increasingly risks trumping principle. Meanwhile, Europe is fracturing. Hungary, under Viktor Orban, openly challenges EU cohesion and brands Ukraine as an adversary, complicating collective policy. Russia continues to pressure through energy warfare, targeting civilian infrastructure to weaken societal resilience. Poland grapples with diplomatic strain following a confrontation with the U.S. ambassador, revealing how easily alliances can fray. And across Asia, Japan recalibrates under Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's snap election victory, balancing domestic priorities with delicate ties to both the U.S. and China. The global order is not changing through a single dramatic event. It is shifting gradually through cumulative pressure, sanctions, economic incentives, military threats, and political maneuvering. Each missile strike, each diplomatic insult, each election, each trade decision compounds the weight of uncertainty. The world is watching these interconnected moves, and the consequences will be felt far beyond the borders of Ukraine, Europe, or Japan. The balance of power is being tested, and the next steps may redefine the rules of international engagement for years to come. This is not just a war story. It is a story of power, leverage, economics, and political calculation. The battlefield is Ukraine, but the consequences are global. I'm Livia, and this has been Global Shift Analysis. If you value deep, fact-based geopolitical breakdowns without noise or propaganda, subscribe and join our growing community. Because in a shifting world, understanding is power. I'll see you in the next analysis.